A few weeks ago, we started talking about love, and we started out by talking about loving like the Lord and loving our enemy. We got the hard one out of the way first. And then last week, we talked about loving the Lord Himself, loving Him back. And then this week, kind of hand in hand, this Valentine's weekend, life-changing love. Talk about the home and marriage and the love that God intended for the home to have and what He intends for it to look like, how His plan and design is. And I don't say, again, as I said last week, you can't separate last week, the first and the second week. You can't talk about loving God if you don't love your enemy. We have to do both. And the same is true this week, that if we're going to have the right love for God, we're going to have the right love for our spouse. We're going to love our mate in the correct way, the way God designed it to be. Our home is going to look right as well. And that's just part of living the godly life that He desires for us and putting Him in the right position. Then it's going to begin to, when we love God like we are supposed to, then it's going to begin to trickle down and it's going to begin to affect all of our relationships. We're going to love our neighbor, we're going to love our enemy, we're even going to love our spouse. Somebody said loving your enemy was a lot like loving your spouse. And so, I guess you don't say that out loud. That might get you in the doghouse this Valentine's weekend. And so, but you cannot pull them apart. You can't say you love your spouse like you should if you don't love God like you should, and you'll never love your spouse like you should if you don't love God like you should. And so, it just kind of all kind of snowballs together. And as I thought about it, I'm sure you're aware there are a lot of New Testament passages that we could use for a text this morning. Certainly, we could talk about what Paul says in Ephesians, and we could get everybody stirred up where he talks about submission and all those things, and we could get everybody riled up. But when I think about the home, when I think about marriage and what God intends, my mind always comes back to this passage in the book of Genesis chapter 2. I am a kind of a firm believer in going back to the beginning. If you want to figure out a problem, generally if you kind of backtrack and go back to where it started. Any of you that have messed with computers any at all know that if your computer starts acting up, one of the things you do is you look and say, when's the last time it worked right? And go back to that point, and go back and fix that. Several weeks ago, the one back there in the back of the church got to acting kind of cranky and didn't want to do right, and I couldn't figure it out, and then it dawned on me. I remembered what had changed, and I said, all right, I'm going to go back and I'm going to take it, and lo and behold, that fixed it. Go back to the beginning. And so instead of going back up to Ephesians where Paul talks about marriage, I want to come back to Genesis chapter 2 where marriage started. Some of you will probably remember back last fall I used this same text, and my message that morning was, what does the Bible say about homosexuality? And you may look at that and say, how do you get both of those messages out of the same text? Well, I think this passage describes the home, what it's supposed to look like, what it is, how God designed it. And so it tells us a little bit about everything about the home. And so this morning I want us to go back and look at this and talk about this topic of life-changing love. And I think that's what God intended marriage to be. I think He meant for it to be life-changing. I think we see that with Adam. It changed his life. He makes it very clear up to that point that Adam was alone, that Adam was missing something until God created Eve. One of the interesting things about this story that happens is we know that basically God shows Adam everything He's created. He brings everything else by and kind of lets him look at them. And I know you've probably heard over the years people talking about Adam naming the animal. I don't really think so much that was the purpose. I think what God was doing was He said, all right, Adam, here's everything else that I have created, and brought them out and said, here they are. and let him look at them. And as they came by, he said, "No, that one's not for me. Nope, that one's not for me. Nope." And when they got to the end of the line, I can picture Adam going, "Is that it? I didn't find one in that line." And I think God said, "That's my point. Adam, there is nothing else for you but what I am about to do. What the one I am about to create. So when I create Eve and I bring her to you, don't go looking for any more. You know there's nothing else here. This is the answer to your need. The loneliness that you feel, the emotion, the emptiness that you feel, here it is. Here is the answer to your need. And so then He created Eve. And once we understand that, and we look at our and understand our spouse in that way, that they are God's answer, God's design for us, then it changes things. And so this morning, I want us to see 4 principles from this story, from this original marriage, that I think show us what God's intention for marriage is. Now, I realize in our day-to-day, in our culture today, that I'm like you. I know the numbers. I hear the horror. I hear the pain. I know that marriage is under attack. I know that many of you sitting here this morning have been through separation, been through divorce. I know the pain. And all I'm doing to you this morning is I want to hold up to you the model. This is what God says for all of us. Young people, in particular, I want you to pay attention, wake up. Some of you are getting about to the age to make some decisions about marriage and about a spouse, and who you're going to date, who you're going to marry, and it can be life-changing. It just may not be life-changing love. I'll guarantee you it's going to be life-changing, and so it's important that you hear the design, the principles that God designed. So you think about that as you plan your life, as you lay out your future. You consider your husband, your wife. I realize again that in today's world, for a lot of people, it's really it's kind of it's not much more of a decision than deciding whether you want a cheeseburger or chicken McNuggets. But it's a lot bigger decision than that, and it can change. It can make your life complete, or it can ruin your life. And so it's extremely important what you do with your future. So this morning, very quickly, 4 principles I want you to see that God lays out for us in this original marriage of Adam and Eve as He brings them together. First thing we learn that is critical to this story is that we see God's design for marriage. We see what God, how He lays things out. He shows us really 2 elements of this love, this life-changing love. He tells us, first of all, He shows us that God's design, what He plans for marriage, is that it is to provide us a partner. Look what He says when He says about Adam. He says of Adam, He says... He says, it's not good for him to be alone. So the first thing that God does with marriage is that God says, I want to provide for you a partner. Adam, I want you to have a partner. And again, He shows him the other animals and says, there's nothing else there. And then He looks at Adam and He says of Adam, He says to him, He says that it's not good for him to be alone, so He created for Adam more work. He created for Adam a golf course. He created for Adam a bass boat. He created for Adam, a country club membership. He created for Adam, it's not what it says at all. It says He created for Adam a wife. And so the first thing we learn about God's design for marriage is that spouse is to be our partner. God says here that spouse is to be the most important thing. He's already shown Adam all the other creatures, and there wasn't a suitable mate there. And so He says, I'm going to create Eve. Adam, you may not understand it right now, but this is the answer. And, it's not good for you to be alone. And so I'm not going to create more hours at work. I'm not going to create, a new hobby. I'm not going to create for you 3 women. I'm not going to create for you a wife and a secretary and all this other stuff. He says, I'm going to create for you Eve. I'm going to create for you one woman. I know, it's kind of, I don't know if it's meant as a joke or what, but I'm sure you've heard people say, that God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I want to point out to you, not only that, He didn't create Eve and Lucy and Susan and Ginger and Marianne and on down the list. He created one woman and said, Adam, here she is. She is your partner, not one of your partners. She is it. She is the only one. And when we let that sink into our hard heads, all of a sudden, I think that transforms. We're talking about life-changing love. When we understand what God says, and let that sink into our, our old hard head. That listen, that she is to be, or he is to be, not just a she, but it's a two-way street. They are my partner. They are the one that God created to be my partner. Not my job, not my hobby. Not going, not the women down at the beauty shop. Not the folks I get on that I get on the phone and gossip with or whatever else. But my spouse is my partner, my only partner. He gave Adam one partner. Not only do we see that it's his partner, not only did he give him a partner, but it makes him perfect. There's a word there that all of us know. We just don't have a clue what it means, and we never use it. When he says it's not good for him to be alone, so I will create for him a helpmeet. Now, helpmeet is a word that none of us have ever used unless we were reading Genesis chapter 2. Yeah, you have never had anybody introduce you. I want you come over here. I want you to meet my helpmeet. That's just they might have introduced them as their better half or ball and chain or some other derogatory term. But just helpmeet has never come up. But it is a great, great phrase when we understand what it means. The word to focus there is not so much the word help, because that basically means what we think it does. But the word that really stands out in that statement is the idea that word meet. Now, how it got translated into English as meet, I have no idea. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know where it came from. In fact, I believe it's the NIV that actually translate that phrase as suitable helper. I believe it. I think that's the way. Am I right? Kevin's checking me up to see if I got it right. Suitable helper, which is really a lot closer. Let me really kind of as I study that word, as I look for what it means. Here's the way I see it. When he says that God's design was that you are to be each other's partner, but he says you are to make each other perfect. In other words, you are to make each other's complete. It's like two pieces of the puzzle. He says you are to go together, and you are designed. God says, I have designed Eve to complete the picture. You've heard that statement, hadn't you, that opposites attract? I think a lot of times that's pretty close to right. I'm not saying always, but I have noticed a lot of times that if you look at a couple, that their marriage seems to be strong and their love is life-changing, and you look at them and think, that's the way I want my marriage to be. It's like where one of them is strong, the other one is weak, and where the other one is strong, the other one is weak, and they just kind of complete each other. They just kind of make each other, it's just, you've seen those couples that, let's just be honest. You see some couples, you look at them and you go, how'd they end up together? Let's be honest. I hate that place, Walmart. I hate that place. But for the last few weeks, I've been going with Rhonda grocery shopping. And really, I don't do a lot of grocery shopping because I've been trying to watch my sugar and there's nothing in the store to eat. But I walk, she'll be going down and I'll get a couple hours ahead of her because I know, and then I'll just wait on her. Or she'll be going, and I'll try to get, and I just stand and I just watch. She gets done and she goes up there to pay, and I go over there to the nail studio, and I'll sit down in their waiting chairs, and I'll sit there and watch the people come by. I like doing that. And I got to be honest with you. I see some couples come by, and one of the things I've always been curious about is how it is we get hooked up with one another. And it goes both ways. I've sat there and I've thought to myself, how in the world did that ugly rascal get that pretty woman? You know, what in the world did she see in that snaggle-toothed, lop-eared rascal? You know, good grief. Now, on the other hand, I'm not real good at looking at it the other way. Melissa asked me a while ago, she said, pointed at Kevin and said, ain't he pretty? I said, not in the least. No. Tommy, is Kevin pretty? Not in the least. Now, if you're talking about pretty crazy, yeah, I'll go along with it. Yeah, if you filling in the blank after that, I might. But I got to be honest with you, fellas, none of you look like much. You know, but I have seen a time or two where I've seen the fella I thought was, you know, he was a little better looking, a little better looking, and I'm thinking, what in the world is he doing to that ugly woman? You know, listen, I'm just being honest with you. You know, don't look at me like I'm the only one. You've done that before. You've looked at couples and just scratched your head. What are they doing together? But on the other hand, have you ever known a couple where you couldn't imagine them apart? Where you just couldn't imagine them apart? When you hear people talk about them, they don't say Joe or they don't say Lucy. When they talk about them, they say Joe and Lucy. And they just say, you just don't, you just can't, it just seems like almost impossible. You know, and I hope, my prayer is that's the way you feel about your spouse. That, I just cannot imagine life without that. And I think that's part of the reason, honestly, in over the years in dealing with it, where one spouse dies or at the end of a marriage for whatever reason, is because that person feels like literally part of me is gone. Part of me has been ripped away from me. And listen, when what God designs here is that kind of life-changing love. That's what He wants our marriages to be like. That's what He wants our home. He doesn't want us to look at our homes, our marriages as, oh no, work's over, I got to go home. He doesn't want us to go through the drudgery of He wants our home to be our safe place. Now, I want, He says, I want that to be our partner that makes us complete. I want to, understand this, this isn't saying anything about me as a husband. I make no claims about me as a husband other than I am one. I make no claim of the quality, just that I am one, okay? Let me tell you something. And I don't know if she believes it, and if she doesn't, I got to work harder. I trust Rhonda more than anybody on the face of this earth. I do. Literally, I trust her with my life. I don't even know what medicine I take. I really don't. I don't have a clue. I don't know when I take it. I know where it is. I could go get it, I reckon, and read the bottles and figure it out eventually. But listen, every Saturday, she goes in and she takes my medicine and she puts it in my little box, and I go in there and I take it. I saw a thing on TV last night, one of them murder mysteries. Some woman was feeding her husband some kind of flour. I done forgot now. Some kind of flour seeds, and when you digest it, it turns in, y'all have heard of that terrorist thing about ricin? Whatever this was turned into ricin. And this man thought he had picked up some disease in the Amazon or something. And come to find out his wife was trying to kill him. Listen, I don't know. I go to the doctor. It hadn't been too long ago. I go in, the nurse is asking us all them questions that the doctor's going to turn around and ask you when he comes in. You know those questions? And she would ask him, and I'd point at Rhonda. I'd point at Rhonda. And she said, what are you going to do if she's not here? I said, I'm not coming. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answers. I literally do not. I don't even look in that container. I go in there, and I dump it in my hand, I take it. I have no idea. I have no idea what I'm taking. I said, that might explain a lot of things. I have no idea. Listen, that's what God intends. And again, that's not saying I'm much of a husband. That just says I married a woman I trust. And so far hadn't let me down. That God says here's the design of marriage, that our partner is to make us complete. Some people, and I'm going to move on, some folks, some married folks sit around imagining life without their spouse. Others can't imagine life without their spouse. And that's God's design. That's what God intended. That's God's design. He says it's not good that he be alone. Our partner makes us perfect. God's description of marriage. Look what he says. He goes on in that verse that all of us know. He says that father, that they should leave their mother and their father and cleave unto his wife. Listen to what God says. God says that your spouse is to be more important to you than the man and woman who gave you life. That doesn't say you disrespect, disown your parents, because the Bible still says honor your father and your mother. It doesn't say honor them till you're 18 and you move out. As a matter of fact, most people with a couple of brain cells to scrub together, once they hit about 18 and 19 and move out on their own, learn how much their mom and daddy did know. Mark Twain said at 16, I couldn't believe how dumb my daddy was, and at 18, I couldn't believe what he had learned in 2 years. God's design is that our partner makes us complete. His description is this. That is not saying, that is not anything derogatory towards your parents. What that is in no way is it saying that you lower the value or lower the importance of your parents, but what it's telling you is how much you elevate the importance of your spouse. That your spouse is more important, and I'm going to say this particularly to men. Your spouse is more important than work. There's something in us men, and you know it, in most men, maybe some of them missing a few cells or something, but in most men, we still got enough caveman in us that we think the most important thing we do is hit it in the head with a club and bring it home to cook. That's who we think we are. That our identity is in providing for our family. And let me tell you something. The Bible makes it very clear that it's your job to provide for your family. I'm going to be blunt here, if you lay down and make babies, you grow up and feed babies. I got 4 of my own to feed, okay? Listen, it is our responsibility to take care of them. But what we've got to understand is that our wife and children, and I don't mean this to be a one-sided message to men or women, but that just fits right here real good. Our wife, our children need us more than they need provisions. They need a roof, they need food. But I'll guarantee you've seen that little advertisement in magazines that says, no man in this world ever got to his deathbed and says, I wish I'd worked more. Listen, God says there is to be nothing more important in your life than your spouse. Let me throw something else at you. I threw something at the men. I'll throw something at the ladies. And that can apply either way. I'm just saying, generally speaking, that's a man problem. That job is most important. Let me tell you something, ladies, that I see all the time. I'm not saying men can't, but I'm saying that I think women are more likely to do this. Your spouse is more important than your children. That doesn't mean you let your children go hungry or sit around in dirty diapers or play in the street. That means your spouse is the most important relationship you got. Because the best thing you can do for your children is love their mother or their father. That's the most important lesson you can teach them. I'm not saying again, I don't know why we're that way. We want to take one and drop the other. I'm not saying we don't discipline our children. I'm not saying we don't raise our children, feed our children. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying part of raising our children, disciplining our children, is to be the wife, the husband that God designed us to be. Yeah, I'm convinced the reason that so many marriages are on the rocks today is because children are growing up not seeing, they're learning what a husband and wife ought to be from the soap operas instead of from mom and daddy. God's design for marriage is that we complete each other. God's description of marriage is that spouse, listen, if your spouse completes you, then they become immediately, when you believe that, then they become immediately the most important thing in your world. What does he say here? He says they become one flesh. You know what? I've become very accustomed, very fond of all my flesh. I came into this world with 10 fingers and 10 toes. It is my wholehearted objective to leave this world with 10 fingers and 10 toes. I get up in the morning and I may debate, what am I going to wear today? What pants am I going to put on? What shoes am I going to wear? What shirt am I going to wear? But it's never crossed my mind, am I going to take my feet with me? They just go. They're that important to me. When our spouse, when we understand we've become one flesh, there's no question what's most important to me. There's no doubt. God says then all of a sudden our spouse becomes as important to us as our arm. One flesh is what he says. That's God's description. You see not only his description, you see his distinction. Look what he says in this passage. He says, shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife? Not his neighbor's wife. And they shall be one flesh. Cleave and leave. One flesh. God says it is to be a permanent relationship. Now, I know, I understand. I know what goes on in the world. I'm just telling you what God designed. And all I'm saying, and I'm especially speaking to our young people here this morning, when I say this, listen, marriage is the most serious decision you'll ever make. I don't know how many of y'all have social media, but it amazes me if you have any young people that you happen to see on social media. Today, he's in love with baby girl Susie. Before the sun sets, oh, my baby girl Lisa. And before the sun comes up tomorrow, best girl I've ever met is, whose names have I used so far? Ginger, I don't know. And by lunchtime, it's Mary Ann again. And before dark, he's back to Susie that he started with 2 days ago. It amazes me to see 12 and 13-year-olds got the love of their life. Oh, I just laugh. Love of your life at 12. Listen, the love of your life at 12 ought to be cartoons. You have no idea. You don't even know what life is, let alone love. You have no clue. Listen, most serious decision you'll ever make, life-changing, life-altering decision, is who you're going to marry and who you're going to spend your life with. And I'm not trying to throw stones. There's some people sitting around you today that'll tell you that in their life they made the wrong decision. There's some grown folks in here, young people, that'll tell you that along the way they chose wrong. And they've paid for it financially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, a far greater price than they ever thought they'd pay. You think seriously about who you holding hands with and thinking you're going to bebop down the aisle with, and you can just stroll out, and if I don't like him, I'll go home to Mama. I love a little story I read. Said a man sitting in his house one day and said the phone rang, and it was their newly married daughter. Said he answered the phone, talked to her a little bit, and said he'd come back. Said when he come back in the room, his wife asked him, said, "Honey, who was that?" And said, "That was, our daughter." Said, "What's wrong?" Said, "Her and what's his name not getting along." Said, "She wants to come home." He said, "What'd you tell her?" He said, "I told her she was home." Listen, you better think about that. That's a serious decision, because God says leave and cleave. And then God's desire for marriage. Look what He says. He says in this passage, this man, they're man and wife and we're not ashamed. He's talking about that marriage is to be holy, it is to be pure, it is to be one man and one wife. He says that's the way it's designed. Let me tell you something real quick while I'm there. We like to point our fingers, and we like to talk about young people who are, let me look around, they're pretty much all going to children's church. We like to talk about young people who are fooling around in the back seat of a car at 15, 16 years old. Can I tell you something? The Bible says sex outside of marriage is wrong. I don't care if you're 15 or 70. That's what the Bible says. Get mad at me. I don't care. Again, I'm going home with the woman I trust with my medicine. Listen, that's what he says. He says, and here's what it amounts to. That takes care of the whole homosexual question. That takes care of all the questions right there. God says marriage is to be a holy union between, marriage and sex are to be a holy union between one man and one woman. That's what He says. That's it. He doesn't say, well, because he doesn't do this or she doesn't do that. No. Not what He says. He says you married her. You married him. And again, we like to talk about, well, look at that teenager. Look at them young people. No. I'll tell you something. I go in a lot of rest homes. You ask some folks that work at rest homes, they'll tell you, old people can be nasty. Angel back there nodding her head. That's what she does for a living. She goes in and out. Listen, it's not just, when he says that it's to be one man, one, he's not just talking about teenagers. He's talking about all of us. This is what marriage should look like. Now, here's what I see going on. And I want to wrap it up with this. I told you a while ago, there's a great passage in Ephesians that deals with marriage. You know what it is, that whole thing about wives submit, and I'd have had all the women mad at me, and that's, again. But here's what I see. We've jumped way up here to Ephesians where it's talking about submission and children and loving your wife like Christ loved the church. And to me, what we've done is we've started roofing the house before we ever got the house built. Tommy will tell you this. Tommy's in construction. And I don't know, Tommy, I don't know how you do it, but I've seen a lot of people build houses. My daddy was a carpenter. My daddy was a very good carpenter. And I tell you something, and that, by the way, carpentry is not genetic. I'll tell you one thing I did learn, though, is the importance of the foundation. I've seen people today roll up with a tractor and just dig up and pour concrete in it and go. No. That wasn't the way Daddy built it. When he dug it out, you dug it out with a shovel, and you went back and you swept it. Get any pebbles, any sticks, anything. There wasn't nothing left. You just kept, it had to be just spotless. You could eat off the dirt. And that's the way it had to be. I've seen people, once they dug their foundation, just roll up and dump concrete in it and just let it settle out where it goes. No. Had to be a string pulled. You had to put the line level on it. And the foundation had to be level. And it had to be measured from corner to corner to corner of this house to the corner of the house down the street and everything else. It had to be square. It had to be level. It had to be plumb. I mean, everything about it. Because if the foundation is wrong, you can build the prettiest house in the neighborhood, but the first good storm, that house will fall down. That house will collapse. God shows us in Genesis chapter 2 what to build our home on. He says, this is what it ought to look like. This is what it ought to be. We're trying to go to all kinds of workshops. Right here it is. God says, here's the plan. One man, one woman for life. That's it. That man, that woman is the most important man. That's the most important woman in your life. Let me tell you a couple mistakes we make in our marriages. I tell young couples this all the time. When you get married, get rid of your single friends. That may sound harsh. I'm telling you, if you send your young couple, you send your children or grandchildren to me before they get married, let me tell you what I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them, get rid of your single friends. Because let me tell you what happens when you get married. And you start working, and you start going home to the same man and the same woman day in and day out. And your little single friend saying, hey, you want to go to the beach with us this evening? They just get a wild idea and want to take off to the beach. Hey, you want to go out to the club with us tonight? And no, I got to go home. And after a while, get rid of you. Now, you might pick some up on down the road, but for the first while, get rid of them. Get rid of them. Listen, be careful who you hang around with, because you'll start acting and looking like them. Be careful. Ladies, you in the workplace, that guy that's telling you how good he'd treat you, if he'd treat you good, he wouldn't be messing with you because he knows you married. He'd leave you alone. He's a useless piece of trash. Fellas, that girl you think is all that and a box of Cracker Jacks at work, if she was worth killing, she wouldn't be running around with a married man. She wouldn't give you the time of day. She'd tell you, you're an idiot. You got a wife. Get away from me. You can't take care of her. What you going to do with another one? Got to build it right if it's going to stand. I want to ask you to bow your heads this morning. Marriage can be life-changing. Life-changing for the good or life-changing for the bad. Here's what I want to throw at you this evening, this morning. Some of you here today, you need to come and maybe you need to bring your spouse. You need to kneel at this altar and you say, God, I want to thank you for this man, this woman that you've put in my life. Maybe you just need to turn around right where you're at and throw your arms around his or her neck and say, I want to thank you and tell you I love you. I want to tell you how much I appreciate what you do for me and our family. You need to come and just say, God, I want to thank you for placing that man, that woman in my life. Wonder what would happen if we prayed for our spouse as much as we complain about our spouse. Wonder what would happen if we prayed for our spouse as much as we nag our spouse. I bet we'd see some changes in our home. Some of you this morning here, your parents, your grandparents, you need to come and kneel. You want to pray for your children, your grandchildren. God help them. God guide them. You bring them to that spouse, that mate that will complete them. Maybe your children, your grandchildren, maybe they're already married. You want to come and pray for their home. You want to come and pray for them. You want to come and pray for the young people of this church, that God will guide them. Maybe you are one of the young people and you want to come and say, God, help me as I grow. Help bring me to that young man, that young woman that will complete me. Not just one I can settle for. Quit praying for a good-looking one. Quit praying for a rich one. And start praying for a godly one that will complete you. I promise you this. You can be married to ugly that loves God, and you'll be happy. You can be married to the best looking fella in town, and if he doesn't love God, you're going to be miserable. God, help me to find that right person. You're here today, and let me really challenge you here. God, make me that right person. God, make me that spouse. Make me, shape me to be that man, that woman that complete. God, help me to complete my spouse. Altars open this morning. Life-changing love. That's what God means marriage to be. Maybe some of you need to come, and maybe your spouse has passed away. You just want to come and say, Lord, I just want to thank you for the man, for the woman that you put in my life. God, I miss them, and it hurts, but God, I thank you. God, I pray that I can be an example to others, that I can help others. Whatever God lays on your heart. Listen, this is one of the most important topics we'll ever deal with in the church, and that's marriage. Marriage, as God designs it, as we stand together.